Welcome to Martinus Centre in Klint in Denmark, to this seminar with the topic Reincarnation and the Evolution of Consciousness. We have a seminar here between 14, we say in Denmark, to 17. That's 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. And to go through this seminar, we have 3 lectures today. And my name is Sören Grind, and we have...
And my name is Pernilla Rosell.
And it was supposed to be Mary McGovern to be with us here today, but she has unfortunately not been able to come today. So we have a stand-in that have jumped into this workshop.
So I got the privilege and the challenge to be here together with you, and my name is Solveig Langkilde.
And let us go through the program for this afternoon. And we can take it up here on the screen so you can see it here. And we have this welcome and introduction. And then I'm going to be the starter, so to say, of this seminar with the topic Studies of Death and the Afterlife in relation to Martinus' view of reincarnation. And we have a pause between every little lecture to change with the computers and the positions. And then Pernilla will have the topic, the growth of compassion. And after the next pause, Solveig will talk about reincarnation and the evolution of sexuality and gender. And we will have, as a last part of the seminar, the possibility for you to put up questions or reflections about this topic or other topics within Martinus cosmology. And there you have the possibility to write in the chat on the YouTube screen, or you could also use Pernilla's mail address, as you see here, Pernilla at martinus.at dk. Yes, we are practicing our English here. And so let me start with this topic, Studies of Death and the Afterlife in relation to Martinus' view of reincarnation. I don't think I have to remind you that we are living in very challenging times. There is a pandemic going on, and we know a lot of people are worried about the climate changes that is very dramatic in many areas of our life on this planet. And we also see a lot of social unrest and political unrest and problems, challenges. And in this time of kind of a world crisis, you could say that it activates a lot of fear within people. And Martinus tells in his writings that all our fears have the root in our fear of death. And that's why it's also very interesting with this topic about death and afterlife to see what are the basics for our fear of death, and is it possible to change this fear, and will it affect also the way we live? I think we live in a very challenging time in many ways, but also when it comes to our worldview. We know that during the last 100 years, many people have gone out of the churches, so to say, and go into the universities. And people are studying, and the intellectual development has been very strong the last century. But now we also see a tendency that many people are shifting from a materialistic perspective and want to integrate it with the science, also with the spiritual questions that also are very urgent for many people today. And one of the areas where we really are challenged when it comes to the worldview is all these scientific and philosophical questions about what is consciousness. And there's one area we will start this seminar and look at, and it is this area about, is the consciousness in the brain, or is it possible that our consciousness also can experience life outside of the brain? This is kind of a tough question from many people when it comes to this worldview, and it's really also challenging this materialistic worldview. And so the question is, can we find support for a non-local consciousness? That's where I will start this lecture. Because if we really could get a scientific proof for that our consciousness survives death, and that we really could understand, if you so to say, or take it in as a truth for us, that we cannot really die, it's only the body that will die, I think that will really change a lot of the way we live our lives and the values we have in everyday life, and maybe also our moral ideals. So just think about the possibility that there will come a time in future where the fear of death is gone, where we have experienced a new life is as a kind of ongoing process independent of our physical body. And that is in fact what people that have had near-death experiences, they tell us that after those experiences, their fear of death is gone. And they talk about another realm that they have been in contact with, where they experienced fantastic all-embracing love and forgiveness, and they felt that it activated a big change in their way of living their life, and especially the fear of death was gone after this experience. That is, nearly 100% of those who have had this experience have lost their fear of death, and that has really changed their way of living and their values. So let us go back to the question if there is a non-local consciousness and see of some of the challenges on this materialistic worldview of consciousness. And let us go back to near-death experiences. And one of the aspects that is really exciting or intriguing here at this near-death experiences is that many people report that they have had an out-of-body experience. They often can see their body from above. For instance, when they are in an operation situation and they get flatlined and they are clinically dead, then they have left their physical body and can see it from above. And I mean, if that is possible, that we can prove that they really have experienced this, that is really challenging the materialistic worldview and the view of our consciousness. And I just read this, for me, fantastic book, in Danish Efter, but in English After, by Bruce Grayson, a beautiful summary of 50 years of investigating this question and really been doing very serious studies as a scientist that Bruce have been working as a psychiatrist, but also as a scientist in this area. And it's a beautiful documentation where he really gives a lot of examples of these near-death experiences and what it means for people and how it can change our worldview. And he has a lot of examples also of these people that has been experiencing seeing their body from outside. And there is one guy, I think it was called Al, that after this operation and where he was flatlined, unconscious, he told Bruce about the surgeon. When he was operated on, right before, he said that the surgeon was standing like this, flapping his arms. And Bruce said that doesn't really sound serious, that a surgeon would stand like this, flapping the arms. And how could you have that fantasy or dream like conception of somebody operating by flapping their arms. And so he said that, is it okay for you that I talk about your operation with your surgeon? And it was on the same hospital, so he contacted the surgeon and asked him, is it right that you, with the operation of Al, that you were flapping your arms? And then he said, yes, it is right, because I have the tradition of putting my hands here, because when they are sterile, I don't want to have them put them on any infectious things. So I hold them here, where it's also sterile on my dress. And to instruct the nurses and my colleagues, I am doing like this to show them, can you do that, and can you get that, and so on. So he is really flapping with the arms when he is doing the operation. And how would anybody fantasize about a surgeon doing this flapping with the arms? So I think it's a very interesting proof that it's not a question of fantasy, it's really something that he has been seeing. And there are thousands and thousands of these stories, and you can listen on the YouTube and with IANs, for instance, where you have a lot of people telling about their near-death experiences. And often we come back to this experience of seeing the body from outside, and even hearing and listening to dialogues in the room beside and so on, where they perfectly well can tell what they said and what they sometimes even thought. So that is really challenging for the worldview to see this possibility. And another very interesting thing that Bruce also lifts for us is that the people that have experienced near-death experiences, they go through a very profound transformation. So being a psychiatrist, or as I am myself a psychologist, working with people and trying to help them to transform in a good way so they get a better life and have more harmony within them and have better relationships, it's really challenging to see how people, through some seconds or minutes or hours in this experience of the other realm, so to say, where they experience this total peace and this all-embracing love and forgiveness, and see their life review and see it also in a very compassionate way. They also even experience the other person's experience of them. It really has transformed their personality. So he gives a lot of examples how they go through a process where they, through these seconds or minutes, have changed much more than I could imagine some clients do in many, maybe years of therapy. And if that would only be a hallucination or some chemical things going on in the brain, in a traumatic situation, how could that have such a positive effect on the person? So that's also telling us that it has to be something they really experience that can activate so much of compassion and new ideals towards a higher morality, and they get rid of a lot of materialistic striving, so to say, and go into a more loving and compassionate way of living. So that is also really interesting to see that the consciousness have experienced something that is transforming their personality so deep. Another area where there are also scientists very deeply involved in the University of Virginia, and Ian Stevenson started this with the memories of past lives with children, and Jim Tucker have continued this science, and a lot of reports with children that tell, maybe when they are 3 years old, 4 years old, 5 years old, they tell a lot of details of another lifetime. And there's one example in the book about Ryan, who as a child starts to talk about and longing back to his life in Hollywood. And he didn't remember the name and so on, but the mother got a book from Hollywood and all these old movies. And they found a person suddenly that he said, that's me. And there they started to be able to investigate if all these things, all these details he had told about Martin's life in Hollywood, if they were correct. And in fact, I think it was about 47 or 55 of these things that they could confirm. And some of the things they confirmed was also very intriguing. You could say that, for instance, he said that I died, my heart exploded when I was 61 years old. And when they had these notes and so on from his lifetime in Hollywood, I think it was there they saw that he died when he was 59. But then they had to go back and see in the birth certificate in his where he was born, and they found that Ryan was right. He was 61 years old when he died. And that's also a very interesting detail. And another detail that is also, you could nearly say mind-blowing, is that when he was in the womb, when his mother went to the doctor and was confirmed that it was a baby boy in the womb, she got very sad and upset because she had been longing for a girl. And he could tell about this visit by the doctor and how they went to a cafe afterwards and with the husband, and she was crying and they were talking about it. And he could tell about what they said and the situation. And that was when he was, or you could say, in the incarnating process. So that also shows and supports this thought of a non-local consciousness, and that we are not totally new when we are in the fetus in the womb and are growing as a little baby child. So there are some challenging thoughts about this and support for this non-local consciousness. Another interesting area is this concept of the cosmic consciousness that Richard Bach brought up in his book. I think it was published 901, so it's more than 120 years ago. He was a psychiatrist, and he himself had this profound, deep spiritual experience that Martinus would call a cosmic glimpse, where he kind of feel a kind of blissful fire and comes into a state of ecstasy and feel that he's totally one with everything, everybody, and he feels the divine's present and that everything is good. And this strong feeling of love vibrating in the universe. And so he was inspired of this experience and wanted to look through history and, of course, Jesus and Buddha and all these religious leaders, but also a lot of authors and scientists have told about similar experiences. And there they come into a realm that is very similar to the things we hear from the near-death experiences. So it is like a veil. When we can put it aside, we come into another way of experiencing life that is very blissful and very loving. So Martinus' work, the Third Testament, his spiritual science, has its background in that he himself had this profound cosmic consciousness that was evolving in his consciousness through a strong experience when he was 30 years old. And he could, by will, focus on this realm, and all the answers was intuitively streaming into his consciousness. And that is the background for his whole works and all his writings. And he also says that it's not to just believe what he is saying with his experience. He says everything is present in nature. We can learn to read the spiritual principles and laws through studying nature. And he has also this example in relating to our theme for today with reincarnation. He shows us this butterfly, where you can see here, and he says here, in fact, you can see reincarnation, a new physical form. When we start as a caterpillar, and the caterpillar goes in and creates this cocoon. And in this cocoon, there is a total shift of all the molecules, all the matter is shifting over to a totally new body. So the caterpillar becomes a butterfly and is not at all similar. And then there has to be something that is organizing this shift. Something that is above matter, that can move matter. Some force is restructuring the physical matter into a totally new physical form. And that is, in fact, reincarnation in front of our eyes. And it's the same thing with all the spiritual principles. They are present here in everyday life, and we can learn to open our eyes. And that is what Martinus wants to help us with in his spiritual science. And with his intuitive consciousness, he gets all this knowledge in a way that is not formed in words, as also they say with the NDEs. And here is one of 100 symbols that are published where Martinus tries to help us to see this invisible structure behind us all. And so this is a kind of a model for our consciousness, which is much deeper and more profound than this usually have when we only have a materialistic worldview. And let us look closer to this symbol. And as we see here on the symbol, there are 3 parts. 1, 2, 3 parts. And the first one is the eternal I. And there is no colors, there is only this white space. It is because, he says, the eternal I that we all have, as a feeling of a center, a feeling that there's something within us that is looking out the world. And we say, I go, I read, and so on. It is a divine something behind all of creation. It's the stillness behind all movement. But to be able to create, we need an ability to create an experience. And that's the second part of this model, this symbol, where we could see that stillness or eternity is transforming into time and space and our consciousness and our physical body. And here, this is so important part of the spiritual science, where we could see that here are all the laws, the principles for all of creation immanent in this part of the symbol. And we can say there is an eternal structure for all parts of our consciousness. And he says there are 6 basic bodies or energies in our spiritual structure. Is the energy of instinct, energy of gravity, energy of feeling, of intelligence, intuition, and memory. So here are the eternal structure behind, and here are the time and space related talent kernels. So all expressions in our consciousness, the way we act and think and feel, are rooted in these talents. And it's the same thing for all manifestations around us in the universe. If it is the solar system, the planet, or an organ, or a mouse, or an ant, or whatever, there is this eternal living being that has the talent to create this type of unique body. And behind the physical body, there is this eternal consciousness that can incarnate and create new physical bodies. And Martinus says that these 2 parts that are unknown for us so far, where he really uses a lot of time to describe them in his works, he says they are this kind of super consciousness that lies behind all of creation. And he describes it here in this quote. Because of that super consciousness, the living being creates his own reincarnation. In other words, it is the true master and creator of all its incarnations and rebirths. It is by virtue of that super consciousness that the living being has an unbroken existence and renews its bodies and tools for manifestation. So the super consciousness is the source, And this source within us is connected with the totality of life, or we could say the Godhead, or the divine, or the source. We are all connected through our internal part with the totality of life, the whole universe, so to say. And from this eternal part, we create our incarnations. So this is reincarnation symbolized here. And we see Martinus tells us we are going from more dark incarnations to more light incarnations, if you look at it in a big overview. So why do we evolve? It is because that all the energy, the thoughts, the feelings, the actions that we are sending out in our dialogue with the universe, they will come back. We know it from the Eastern religions with karma, from Christianity we talk about as we sow, we reap, and so on. And in all these religions, in different ways, we learn that there is kind of a meaningful and purposeful process in the universe, in our personal life. So all of our incarnations are streaming out of our eternal body, so to say, and our super consciousness. And it's interesting with the near-death experiencers. They say that when they were on this other realm, on the spiritual side, they say that there it was just a fact that the golden rule was kind of a law. It was not something that religions have influenced us in and told about only. It is in fact something that is. The golden rule is telling about a state of the universe. It's like Newton, he didn't invent gravity. He realized that there was a law of gravity. So that's very interesting to see how the people with the near-death experiences, they see this golden rule. It's present in all religions, and it is the way life is structured. And I guess that's also why they often come into a more striving after practicing the golden rule to behave towards others as they want to be met themselves. But creating consciousness is really an organic transformation of consciousness. It's an evolutionary process. And here Martinus gives us a concept of knowledge. He says knowledge, that's behind everything. If we look in nature, we look at a plant, there is a knowledge for creating a plant. And all the beautiful way the cycles in nature are working, and within our body, it's really relieving for us that there is a knowledge incarnated in everything. That's why I say it's so important for us to learn to see these three stages of knowledge. He says, we have a first stage where we become aware of something that we want to learn. For instance, maybe I listen to a person playing the piano and I get inspired. And then I start to practice. That's the next state of knowledge. I get quite another more profound contact with the knowledge when I try to practice it. And after a while, I've been practicing playing the piano, it becomes see knowledge. It's an automatic function. I don't need to think, where shall I put my fingers? They are doing it themselves. And when you become a genius in playing the piano, then you have really this see knowledge on this musical area of life, so to say. And it's the same with all the characteristics, all the thoughts, all the feelings. It's a question of talents that we've been building up, and the knowledge is growing within the area we are practicing. So if you look at evolution, you can see that it is a question of gaining knowledge on area after area and after area. And if we look at our own state of consciousness, we have a part of our consciousness where we are day conscious and we are longing to create more knowledge or a talent in a certain area. That's the A knowledge. And then we have another area within our personality and life where we are practicing these ideas and longings, and we are growing in that area. And we have a lot of automatic functions. For instance, just look at our body. We have all these organs, And when a child should start to walk, they see others walking, and then they start to practice. And very soon it becomes an automatic function for them to walk. It's the same principle behind all our functions. They have gone through these stages. And that's the same thing in nature, in everywhere, that nature and our body and our consciousness is a question of knowledge that is built up through the evolution. And when we have learned something, we want to learn something new. And out of hunger and satiation, we continue the process of evolution in an organic way. And this organic process is also presented here in this symbol. We also often call it the main symbol, the eternal word picture. And we see also here this eternal I within us as the dots, all the individuals in the universe of all kinds. And we can think that we can realize that behind all the colors there is this white background that shows that we are one. We are united with the divine, with the totality of life. And here we, as an individual, in a dialogue with the divine, with this realm of consciousness, we are creating this consciousness in this creation that we see here, the third part, the creation of these physical bodies here and also our consciousness. And it is an evolution because we always are in a process of learning. So if we look back in our history, we can see the minerals. They are not aware in the physical world. They are spiritual beings in a way, but they are longing into the physical world. And the plant kingdom is the next part of the evolution. And then there we go over to the animal kingdom. It's a very, very gradual process over millions of years. And here we have humanity. And we are in fact heading out of the physical matter and this world of resistance and are heading for this cosmic consciousness. Everybody, it's not only Martinus or Jesus or Buddha and so on, having these strong experiences. We are all heading for the same state. We are all on this road to initiation. And then we go into the spiritual worlds here where the real human kingdom, the kingdom of wisdom and the divine world. And interesting enough, there is a cycle here. And the cycle is a principle of life. We know it from everyday life that we have day and night. It's dark in the night. It's light in the day. And we know it, or we are studying to know it, learning to see that it's also with reincarnation. We know it also from here in this part of the world from the year. We have winter and we have summer. It's more light and more darkness. But in the reincarnation process, it's kind of, from our perspective, a little bit upside down in that sense that when we are incarnated in the physical world, we are in the darkness, we are in matter, we are in challenges, we are in suffering. But when we go into the other side, as we say, the spiritual sides, when we're disconnected, we're into the light. So that's also a dialogue in lifetimes between the physical world, in the resistance and darkness, and then into the light. And then he shows that there's a much bigger cycle of millions and millions of years, as we told here about the big evolution. And it's a spiral cycle. So we go into matter again after enormous times, and on a higher level and a higher level, it's an eternal process with a spiral cycle. So what will then be the consequence of, if we can take in or make it our own knowledge to see this in nature and so on with reincarnation, if it sounds inspiring for us, how does it change us? Well, I will take just some of the consequences of reincarnation, and Pernilla and Solveig come back to more of the consequences. And one thing is that it's ourselves walking through history. We have been, when we study history, it's in fact our own evolution we are studying. That means also when we look into the future, it's our own future. We talk now in this climate change period about that we have to leave a better world for our next generations. And in fact, it's also our coming incarnations. So it's also our own future. And some people get inspired to do more and not be so uncareful with life when they see that we are also a part of it. And another aspect is that our evolution and all living beings have a purpose and a direction. When you think that life is just a coincidence, that is a natural consequence of the materialistic worldview, there's no direction. We're not heading anywhere. We are just living this single life. But when we are a part of evolution, of course, there is a direction. And the moral ideals we have about neighborly love and the golden rule, that is something that is our own future. We are heading for that state of consciousness. So there is a direction. And also, if you go back to everyday life experiences, you could say that when we reincarnate, we gather experiences from lifetime to lifetime, and they are all enriching. They are all widening our understanding of each other and life. So we are growing not only by the pleasant experiences, but as we will come back to, really by the unpleasant experiences. They develop our understanding for our neighbors, for other beings, not only humans, but also animals and nature. So all these experiences are growing, and we are enriched by every experience. Nothing is worthless. Everything has a worth for our development. And as a psychologist, I also find it very, very interesting with the way we look at our personality. And we know there are a lot of psychological models that tells us that we have an unconscious part. And with a perspective of reincarnation, it grows immensely. It's an enormous growth that also can help us understand the challenges we go through, maybe the phobias we have. And also when we look at YouTube and see these small children, 4 years old, playing the piano as a beautiful artist. And where does these talents come from? When you have a reincarnation perspective, it's not so funny to see this. Well, it's interesting, it's funny in one way, but it's quite natural to see that somebody has these genius talents from past lifetimes, and it's very easy for them to activate them. And some of us are new beginners, and it takes some lifetimes to become a genius, for instance, in music. And in that perspective, reincarnation is really opening up for a very bright future. It's a very optimistic worldview we are studying when we come into reincarnation because of this growth also of humaneness. And Martinus also states in one of his books, number 2 of Livetsbo, where he says, "Imagine how things would be if reincarnation or rebirth were not an actual fact. How could there even ever be any justice? That is to say, absolute equality for all living beings in the universe." And I think that's a very interesting way of looking at life that also is connected with many of the people that have these near-death experiences, where they feel that they are really one with everybody. And when we have reincarnation, we all go through different challenges in different lifetimes, and we all change roles from lifetime to lifetime and have the big learning process to understand what neighborly love is. Okay, thank you. That was the first lecture in this seminar, and now we will have a little pause. And we said the schedule is approximate, so we just follow the flow, so to say. And let's see here. The next lecture will start, shall we say, 10 minutes to 3. So welcome back, 10 minutes to 3.
Right, welcome back after the pause to the second part of this seminar. And I would like to welcome you as well to Klint. I'm very happy to be here myself after 5 months in Sweden because of the corona pandemic. We have those challenges, as Sören talked about in his great presentation. And I think it's very transformative times in many ways for us all. But one thing that we really appreciate and that we are learning all over the world is how to meet online instead. We do miss our physical possibilities, but we get access to all these seminars, online conferences and so on that suddenly, or even concerts and other things that suddenly are free to everyone, and including those NDE experiences we do really appreciate. I think that we that have studied cosmology for quite some time, we find it extremely rewarding to listen to all these personal stories from different parts of the world that really confirm some of the principles that Martinus tells us about in his cosmic analyses. So I will continue now, as you can see, with the title with this presentation and talk about one aspect of this evolution. We will stick to the keywords compassion, evolution, reincarnation, and the meaning of suffering that Sören mentioned at the end of his lecture. And as you can see on this quote from Martinus, he says, or he states, "How could our faculty for compassion or love be developed if we never ever experienced suffering?" And that might seem sort of self-evident in a way, but when we come to think of it, it certainly gives all the suffering and pain another meaning. And it gives us perspectives of time that you have seen, and we will come back to that. And one thing that I find very inspiring when listening to those people who tell about their near-death experiences is that, I think it was a doctor actually in a German film that said that their capacity or their compassion seemed to have grown after this experience. I think you mentioned that, Sören, which I think is amazing because we realize, as you also mentioned earlier, that, and I have learned as well, that we learn that people are more or less stable in the personalities, and some people seem to be more compassionate than others. And suddenly those people have extremely transformative experiences and come back, and they seem to have a huge extent of compassion for other people, for animals, for their own body, sometimes depending on the circumstances. So then arises the question, how do we develop compassion? And why do we have these different levels of compassion? And perhaps we can find some answers, or we will find some answers in Martinus' analysis, and we can only go into some aspects here now. But I am, by profession, a language teacher and a linguist, so I'm interested in words, and I just started thinking about the word compassion. It's not that old compared to human history. It seems to be perhaps 2,000 years or so, a little longer. Comes from Greek, and it means, in English, but it's more or less the same in the other European languages. It's the only languages I can tell about. It means feeling of sorrow or deep tenderness for one who is suffering or experiencing misfortune. So it's really a powerful word and a powerful feeling. And if we look at the etymological roots of it, it comes from Latin, com, that means with, and from party, to suffer. It's sort of a verb stem somehow. Probably you who listen to this know that better than I do, but the basic meaning would be to suffer with. So compassion has to do with to suffer with someone, and I think that's also a very powerful image. And even more interesting perhaps is that it comes from the Greek word sympatheia, which means originally another meaning than compassion. Really, it means sort of that you're connected to everything. Usually symbolizes that things are connected. So you can see that the word has to do with suffering as well, that you can experience somebody else's suffering, but also the sense of being connected. And I gather this information from a wonderful website called etymonline.com. And then just to continue a little on the linguistic path, I won't go deeper into it, but if you look at some related words, I mean, no word is an island. Sometimes you say you always have to look at other words. There are, of course, synonyms like sympathy or empathy or pity, commiseration, and other words in that direction. And we know that those words are also used, for example, in the Bible. I'm not really a great Bible reader. I don't know if I have been in a previous life, but I'm not now. But I just sort of stumbled upon some Bible quotations that I thought were interesting too, because when you relate to those NDE experiences or near-death experiences, they tell about deep spiritual experiences, and they also talk about God, even if they say that God is much bigger than the God you learned about in school. But then the word compassion is often used. We are taught to be compassionate in the old religions. So you can see in this quote, be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you. Martinus would say that's a misunderstanding of Jesus' role. Could go into that later on, perhaps. But the main thing is that we are sort of encouraged to develop those talents. And then in another quote, praise be to the Lord and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort. And then I also realized when I sort of experimented with this that you can't really exchange the word compassion that easily. If you would say, praise be to the God, the Father of sympathy, somehow, or the Father of empathy, or the Father of pity, I don't know. It's very different how we react to those terms at any rate, but I think I would feel slightly insecure or perhaps a little sort of empty if somebody said, well, it's the Father of sympathy, because it would be okay. Father who sympathizes with you but sort of leaves us on our own to do this, or the Father of pity, he pities us, but what then? So you can see that compassion is a strong word, I think, and has this deep meaning of I suffer with you and I also wish to help you. I think that would be the difference perhaps between the other words that are related. They also use the word tender-hearted in some translation varieties, which indicates that compassion is grounded in the heart, which I think is important too. So the faculty of compassion, as it's called also in Martinus's works, would be the same as real neighborly love, and a very strong word that I think, an image that has come to us in lots of different varieties. And as I said, it has this meaning of not just sympathizing, not just liking you, but love in the sense of being with you all the time. And Martinus gives us then this analysis of compassion, and as Sören just talked about, all our talents, like piano playing and so on, have been trained, have been practiced in previous lives. But perhaps we don't usually think that about mental talents, since we don't usually, at least not in Christian traditions, we usually not count on reincarnation and the possibility of practicing compassion, like you do in school. Now you have practiced 1 life, 2 lives, 3 lives, many lives. And some people perhaps are experts on compassion. Jesus Christ is lifted as the big example, but I think the way we were taught in school, now Sweden is a very secularized country, but we were still taught a little about Christianity. It's like that he was born the perfect person, the perfect Son of God, the perfect compassionate person. And there's no way that we can learn that. That's why we needed him, so that God could forgive us for not being as compassionate and loving as he is. And Martinus, of course, gives us another perspective, that compassion is something that we learn. And he also tells us it's based on past memories. And we will look at some more quotes and some bits of his analysis when he shows that. And here you can see another symbol. Søren talked about his 100 symbols. You can find it on our page, martinus.dk. He has his own symbol language in a way. So you can't go into all the details in those seminars, I think. But you recognize the triune principle, it's called, isn't it? Here as well, that actually this is, even if it perhaps looks abstract, all these sections here are a living being. You could see it's a living being developing through this spiral cycle. Here you would see one cycle then, so you would start here. Oops, here it is. In the plant kingdom, going on, plant kingdom being symbolized by red, and then the animal kingdom being symbolized by orange. And here you see, I think you can perceive here a white line. And here approximately, he says, is where the human being, terrestrial human beings, as it calls us, a little bit, sort of an interesting word. Terrestrial human being starts here. So we're still in the animal kingdom. You see the earth, he's very pedagogical. And you see that the goal will be that the golden key, so to say, the great birth, the cosmic consciousness that we will all receive. But in order to do that, we must develop compassion. And what he says, which is very interesting, is not only that we develop compassion, being based on past memories as human beings. We can imagine that. We go through suffering and we develop compassion. But he even says it starts even earlier in the animal kingdom with real animals. And I took a short walk this morning and met a cat, a nice little cat, which was very cute. But I thought if I would have a chat with that cat and just talk to it and have a conversation about killing mice or not, I don't think, or I'm quite sure as you are, it wouldn't be possible, because the cat wouldn't sort of being able to speculate on the capacity of compassion in that way. That would be in a cartoon. It wouldn't be for real. If the cat would need a mouse, it would just kill it and take it. We know that. It's based on instinct. So even if it's cute, even if it's nice, we know there's a difference between us and the cat. But what Martinus says is that it starts in the kingdom, in the animal kingdom. Because there is so much suffering. And we know that when animals are killed, they cry out. And he mentions that many times, this outcry actually has some kind of purpose, because nothing is purposeless, that goes beyond just sort of physical survival. Because if you just go physical survival, that cry would be useless, because nobody would listen to you. If this is a sort of running animal in a herd, the others wouldn't stop. And this I don't know what it is, a jaguar, puma, I don't know. No expert on animals, will certainly not sort of stop and think, no, I don't think I'll kill you. That won't happen. A lion is a lion, he says, and a lamb is a lamb. And those principles are always valid. But it does cry out. It's an instinct. We know that. The cat that I met would cry out if something would threaten its survival. And we cry out. We pray. He says that this cry is the first beginning of prayer, actually. And he also says, and we'll come back to that, that this is the very first sensation of sort of a mental existence. Because after a while, when the animal has experienced this many, many times, it creates memories of suffering, of pain. And of course, that takes a long time before that is created. And it means that it can start remembering that, and then being even cleverer when it comes to avoiding being killed. And so actually, later on, that would be the same as then the basis for also developing compassion, because we would recognize it in other animals. In the beginning, it perhaps just an automatic recognition, perhaps not so much compassion as just recognition that animal is hurt and you want to flee perhaps. But later on, and especially in humans, it awakens automatically after a while, the need for help. So he says, in reality, compassion is nothing less than unconscious recognition in the memory of experienced suffering. So it's important to realize those steps. You experience suffering, you store that as memories, you can collect those memories, and then that is the basis for recognition when the situation happens again. But very important, this is a baby, so we sort of leave the animal kingdom and the cat right now. Very important, we don't remember all our past lives, and I don't think we want to. I don't know, I think some of you who are listening maybe have listened to all these stories of past lives and trying to do some, what are they called? Past life regressions. Exactly. And I thought about that too. It seems so very interesting to speculate if you have been a princess in Egypt, or if you have been murdered in London, or whatever interesting, or some person that you have met, if you have met that person before. But just imagine being able to remember 10 lives. That would be a huge effort every day to live, because we can't even remember all the details of our own life. So if that baby would remember 10 lives when it was being born, it would probably not be sort of the basis for it would just be unpractical. So I think it's quite good the way it is. But he says that memories appear in two phases, because we do experience lots of things every day. And when we experience suffering and pain, for example, being killed, that creates a memory with clear details of a phenomenon. Also interesting that those people who experience near-death experiences seem to have a much better memory, for at least for a period of time, being able to remembering the whole life, that the sort of life film or life story, but also other things, details. So of course we store the memories. They are stored somewhere in our superconsciousness, as Sören mentioned. And then Martinus says, and it's somewhat simplified here, that the experience remains in the consciousness, and that would be then in the superconsciousness, only as a knowledge of the phenomenon's principle or essence. That means, which I guess is the good thing, we don't remember all the things when we died as an animal or as a human being, as a primitive human being, and all the times that we ourselves caused suffering for others. But we remember the principle. It has left sort of an essence or some kind of kernel, and that means that we can recognize it. And that is the basis for compassion, he says. And you can see that the quote is from the Book of Life, where he goes into this. So the little newborn baby here isn't newborn in the sense that it brings nothing with it, and that would also be quite useless. Because some of you are teachers perhaps, and just imagine if you would teach the same class every year and just start from scratch every year in mathematics, for example, like you have, Solveig, taught mathematics. If you just start from scratch with the same group, that would be the cycle that would never move forward, and it's not like that. It's a spiral cycle. So, of course, that baby brings a lot of experience with him or her. I don't know what gender it is. But it remains as an essence, and probably, if I interpret it correctly, we have a lot in our unconsciousness that we don't, much more than we know, much more experience than we know, and probably something that we perhaps don't even remember, but it is there somewhere, it is stored. And just to see some concrete examples of that, when it comes to compassion, I think we take it for granted, but as we said, it's something that has been trained and developed. You can just see here 2 examples. Martinus says, well, you will feel your fellow suffering, you can fully comprehend it. And the picture to the left is a young American girl who has played a baseball game, I think, American game, and being comforted because she has lost. You can sort of feel the despair when she has lost. And the little boy, it might be her little brother, we don't know, just has this automatic reflex, well, she needs to be comforted. He doesn't stop thinking, what should I do, or something like that. It's just automatic. I would say that's an automatic talent that has been developed. If somebody is sad, you want to comfort that person, especially if you know him, you know her. And the same situation would be to the right. We see an elderly person, actually a 90-year-old grandmother. It might seem a happy picture, and it is in a way, but it's said in that context that she's 90 years old, she has a celebration, but she can't meet her grandchildren, nor her children. She can only see them on the phone. And you can see that the nurse, and I think that's quite touching, it's a small thing, but it's touching, because she automatically sort of just puts a hand on her shoulder and is close to her and has that physical presence which that elderly lady can't have at the moment. And you can see because of the face mask that it's because of the pandemic. And again, I think that's something we do automatically and something that many people have suffered from during the pandemic, that we have to refrain from those automatic talents. That when somebody is in pain, when somebody is sad, we want to comfort them, we want to touch them or be close to them or comfort them in different ways. And we can't do that. And that's very educational as well for other reasons, because of course there's a meaning to that too. But I think that the main point is compassion is based in our faculty of feeling, and it's just something that we do. And we want to help in both those cases. The situation just sort of made those people want to help, which seems quite natural, but it's interesting to think about it, because of course we don't always do that. It would be nice to think that we were finished human beings, but we know that from Paul, I think it's called in English, in the Bible, he says, I don't do what I want to do, I do what I don't want to do, and we have those two natures. So we have our old talents from the animal kingdom. They are very strong. We have that C, we had that A, B, and C knowledge that you remember. And of course we have many, many C talents perhaps from the Roman Empire. I think this is probably some kind of reenactment because it doesn't look that real. But 2,000 years ago, we would bring our children to watch people just fighting each other to death, or seeing animals killing people, lots of blood, lots of violence, and that would be entertainment. And that is an indication that we have developed, because we don't do that today. If we would see something like that today, our nervous system probably couldn't stand it. And we certainly wouldn't bring our children to do that. We have developed those talents. You can see female football players in the row, so it's more civilized today, but of course there's still some kind of energy of gravity, of fighting instinct here that we need to outlive. And also, interesting last, of course, also women. I think that Solveig will talk more about men and women in this process later on. But what Martinus says, the ability to have compassion is based on memory images of former experiences, but it's obvious, he says, and that's something he very often tells us, which is comforting. It's obvious that it can't be perfect in the first stage of his creation. It's like practicing to play the piano. If somebody would expect you to do that at once and you can't, you would just give up and say, I will never be a pianist. But of course you need to practice, and not just one life, but many lives. And it's the same with compassion and all the other human talents. So I also gather that psychiatrists and so on often discuss that question, why do we have those different capacities for compassion? Why are there people who seem to feel no compassion at all? And why do we sometimes seem to regress? Do you say that? Regress, to go back into more primitive states. We think we are very humane, but you can see now the coronavirus has sort of given birth to some kind of corona nationalism in a way. We fight, we want to have the vaccine, and we want to protect your own citizens first, and so on, and many borders are closed. And he calls that, which is an interesting word, he says that if strongly retarding forces do not interfere, and that will be an individual, he will react in the interest of relieving his fellow being's suffering. So the normal thing would be to comfort somebody who suffers, because we have practiced that so long and we have suffered so much. But there would be some forces. For example, the debate about boat refugees to Europe. Before the coronavirus, we talked a lot about the Mediterranean being the most dangerous and lethal boundary in the world. Thousands of people drowning there every year, and people talked a lot about it, and actually they still drown, but we don't talk as much about it, probably because of those retarding forces. But there could be other reasons. We could discuss this later on, perhaps, or you might have examples, like peer pressure in school. Martinus talks about the importance of thinking about what you eat or drink and so on. But if all your peers, especially when you're young, live in a certain way, it might be difficult to stick to your own level of compassion. You might feel it's wrong to eat meat, for example, but perhaps you do it because you want to adapt. And at a larger level, then group pressure, herd instinct, as I said, nationalism. It seems to be very often that we are inclined to feel we are part of a group, and then we have another group, like Swedish citizens being 10 million people in the world, and then the rest is one group, like the out group, and we are the in group. And that's just an instinct. But with Martinus's analysis, we can understand that and don't judge that, but we can be aware of it. That's an old talent. We don't need it any longer. It actually stops us from expanding our capacity of compassion. And again, I think it's so interesting that those people who experience a near-death experience just seem to have an overflow of compassion, sometimes even so much that they are so sensitive to other people's thoughts and feelings that they just need to stop it because it would be too much. So that's something, again, we need to practice. I mentioned regression through fear and self-preservation instinct, obviously materialized through the corona pandemic as well, but we recognize it in many situations if we think about it. Alcohol and drugs, as I understand it, very often have the effect of interfering with your normal sense of compassion and love and other things, like judgment, for example. And again, then that's a more basic analysis. All of us, practically, almost all of us living on Earth, have an imbalance between our capacity of feeling and our intelligence, and we could also have that in different areas. But we could remember that Martinus said that the ability to feel compassion, and we also saw the examples from the Bible and so on, is in its essence rooted in our suffering experiences, has something to do with our heart in a way, and not just with intellect, even if we need this balance between intellect and feeling. And then we could just come back to phase 2 of our memories, and we see this symbol again that Sören showed, that we know that we store our talents in this superconsciousness, which means that we store the essence of our memories here. But if we haven't experienced this kind of suffering, and I think it has the example of, for example, a cancer illness, severe illness here, we can't mobilize it in our unconscious memory even. I think most people have had many cases of suffering and illnesses, but it could still be that we have different parts, and some things we might never have experienced if you have never been a refugee, or if you have never been homeless. We could just walk past a homeless person and think, okay, that's sad, but I can't do anything about it. But another person just can't bring herself or himself to just walk past, just feels I need to do something, I can at least give a friendly word, I just can't just walk past because I know that that person is suffering. And that is because the second person then has this memory material. But if we don't, and it's important that Martinus stresses that we should never judge that, because if we don't have it stored here, then we can't really manifest it. It seems unrealistic, and then such people, he says, can appear. He shouldn't say old; he should say cold, cold and unfeeling in that area. That's a typing mistake. Cold and unfeeling in that area, even if they could be quite intelligent in some other areas. I remember myself when perhaps you meet people who are extremely intelligent. It could be doctors or business people, and so on. They could also be quite tolerant. For example, when it comes to homosexual people, sexuality is a topic we will come back to, or other things, religious inclinations. So if they just buy more products, they could be homosexual or Arabs or whatever. But if we talk to them about bridging the gap between rich and poor, then the same person might be quite callous and cold. Say, well, I can't do anything about Indian people being poor. It's not my problem. So then I think that might explain, these analyses might explain that in some areas we have lots of material and we have logical thinking, and in other areas, in this sense. We don't have any memories, not enough at least. So he says the more we have suffered, the more sympathy and compassion will arise in our consciousness in that second phase. And I will wrap it up soon, but just show briefly another symbol here, and won't go into details, where he also shows us how important it is to understand mankind's various capacity for compassion and love. In this symbol, yellow symbolizes feeling and green intelligence. And without taking the details, we could see that, let's see if I can find my mouse, some people here who would be inspired by the new impulse, New World impulse, which would be the spiritual science, people who are no longer inspired by traditional religions, because it would be the lower part of the symbol, but it would just stick to those categories, which are categories. There are many, many varieties. But there would be some few people who have a perfect balance, or almost a perfect balance, between feeling and intelligence. And they would actually be able to manifest the best compassion, because they would also know what's the best thing to do if they want to be in contact with providence. They would also probably spend a lot of time with communication with God in order to know what's the best thing to do in difficult situations. And then he says that some other people have an overweight of feeling. And if you have an overweight of feeling, perhaps also combined with instinct and energy of gravity, as we have, that might manifest itself in intolerance and so on. And if we have an overweight of intelligence, which is especially relevant for compassion, that would mean the same as we can see in this quote. He says here, if a human being has as yet developed only as far as being able to understand its neighbor's suffering with his brain, but not with his heart, it will feel no need whatsoever to help its neighbor in need. It's somewhat freely translated here, or summarized here. And I think that too can be that an intelligent person could recognize that the world is unjust and that we need to help other people, but could sort of have a limit. Well, I have my life, I want a comfortable life. And he goes on to say that those beings usually think more about their own family, their own children, and so on. So in that sense, the only thing that can develop and that will develop that person's compassion, capacity to feel compassion, would be your own individual sufferings, not any kind of reading or logical thinking in that sense. That also helps with other things. And I remember one of these near-death experiences is what a Swiss girl been interviewed on a German TV channel called Thanatos. Very interesting. She told about what she experienced when she was operated on. It was sort of a difficult operation where she almost died, very sort of critical. And she said that she saw one woman who, I'm not saying that this is true for everyone, it might be a little gender bias, but this is one case. She saw one woman because she could perceive all the thoughts. That was the interesting part. She was hovering above her body, didn't understand what was happening, had a typical near-death experience, and she could see those people's thoughts. And she saw that one woman was very concerned and worried about her. And then she saw that the others, I think they were men operating, were very concentrated, very focused. And she also said that one of them had football in his head. It was just sort of interesting, because it's a detail that also makes these stories so credible, because you couldn't just find that up. I mean, imagine that. And probably he was a good surgeon, even if he was thinking about football, but I was thinking about it might be a little the same. Very focused on doing a good job, but not perhaps too much bothered with compassion in the sense that the woman was in that situation. So that's just an example that we are different. But we will develop towards the same goal. And here you see, and that's the last symbol you will see here, where Martinus shows us what he calls the principle of world redemption. But you could say that he shows us this spiral cycle just from another angle, focuses on another aspect, and this will be our spiritual development. Here again, in the beginning, mixed with a lot of, or just dominated by a lot of energy of gravity, as he calls the orange color. That's animal instincts, the instinct of power, where compassion would be very far away, and where we would be inspired by religious impulses, where actually there would even be perhaps men where you would sacrifice people and so on. And you would just follow that. And later on, through our own suffering, through our memories, you see that it gradually turns into yellow, which then symbolizes energy of feeling, but also here the humane religions. And we have those three rays here: Christianity. He says it's Christianity, Buddhism, and Islam, but there are a lot more. So again, it's just a symbol. And the main thing is to see that slowly, everybody, it doesn't matter what impulse you belong to, what tradition you have lived in on earth. Everybody, every being moves towards the same goal, which is that golden key, that glimpse, that spiritual science, or the true God, the real Godhead, that sort of everything ends up in, and that we have our individual variation on our way there, as I said, but on the whole we follow this huge part. And if you go back to that feeling of compassion, going back to the word sympatheia, that we are interconnected with everything, I think we can see that this is also what Martinus tells us that our development is, and what those people having a near-death experiences can also glimpse, that we are really connected. And this is the way we will go. And just to see that formulated in another way by a poet that you probably recognize, he puts it in a beautiful way, because, I mean, nobody wants to experience pain and suffering like that normally. We want to experience happiness and enjoyment. But he says, and it's beautiful, your pain is the breaking of the shell that encloses your understanding. And in that single line, he brings in the balance, I think, at least I interpret it that way, of logic, of intelligence and feeling, but also of understanding, of seeing the reason behind all this. That reincarnation would give you the key, why it is like that. But you need the pain in order to see what life is like for other people. And I know that many people have witnessed and told us that even if something has been very, very painful, then they realize after that period they wouldn't want to miss it, because it was such a valuable experience and they had learned so much and they had changed as people. So it's painful, but it's valuable. And I just go on to the last one here. And he summarizes it, and we let Martinus summarize it until we have a little pause again. That we will go on. We need to have those experiences of suffering in those areas when we are not finished. We can't avoid it, even if we wish it. But he says, when we feel compassion in all areas of life, I can recommend, by the way, a lecture by Mary McGovern, who couldn't be here today. She has a wonderful lecture called Widening the Circus of Compassion, I think, where she talks about all the living beings that we should need to practice compassion. It's not just our old grandmother or boys, but it's also animals, our microbeings in the body, our planet, and so on. When we feel compassion in all those areas, he says, it becomes total love and identical with the eternally leading and guiding forces of the universe. And then we will actually reach our goal. But we have time for practicing, and in the meantime we also need breaks and pauses. So thank you so much for your attention, and we'll have a 10-minute break again. Jonas will tell us what time it is and when the break will stop, I think. Or if you can help me?
Until 15:40.
Until 15:40. Okay. So we hope you stay with us, and I hope that you ask questions in the chat, by the way, or by email. So because you could always, if you'd like to share some personal experiences, anything that you would like us to discuss in this last part of the seminar where we will talk together. But we will have a break, and then you will listen to Solveig's presentation after the break. So thank you.
Så vil jeg sige, I want to greet you, welcome back. And it's in English. I will try to remember that, and we will go on. And my topic for today is reincarnation and the evolution of sexuality and gender. And in fact, this is a topic that's very fundamental in all of the writings of Martinus. And the reason for that is that sexuality is a part of the underlying structure of the whole of universe. We have heard here from Sören and Pernilla that the whole of universe is this living being consisting only of living beings, from the micro beings to the micro beings, macro beings to the micro beings, and all of us have a sexual structure consisting of a masculine pole and a feminine pole. And how these poles, why they are so important is because they are in fact governing the whole evolution of our consciousness. Therefore, it's a very important topic. And that there's something very important happening just at the present time in human beings all over the world, in fact, but it's more visible at some places than at other places. But and I will start with giving you some signs of this big shift in our consciousness because of the change in our sexual system, in our sexual structure. And the signs, if we think of mankind 100 years back, we can look at Scandinavian, for instance, then the divorce wasn't a natural thing. Very few persons in their marriages got a divorce. And even when we go up to the 50s, I was in the school in late 50s, and in my class there was one girl. She lived with her single mother, and the father was not there because they had got through a divorce. And that was very peculiar for us other kids who had our dads and moms at home. But if we go into the school today, most of the classes here in Denmark, half of them, of the kids, live in divorced families, so to speak, with a mother or two mothers, or a father or two fathers, or in other very colorful constellations. So we live really in a time where in 50, 70 years, there has been a lot of changes in this very much fundamental structure according to how societies are shaped with the building block of the families in the marriages has been the building block. And now it's just dissolving in a way. And that is what is going to happen, Martinus says. He wrote about this already in the first book, not much, I will say, but in Livets book, volume 1. But he wrote the whole volume of Livets book 5 is in a one way dedicated to this topic, the sexual transformation. And together with this divorce, it's also obvious today that so many people are living single lives in the big cities, and that's sure for the whole world nearly, that 40, 50, 60% of the households, there will live only one person. And this is also this big change that has happened in a very short time. And connected with this is, of course, also the problem that has arisen many countries that the nativity has decreased so much that they try. I know in Finland and in Japan, they try to persuade the young people to get married and to get babies, because they can see that the line, the graphic line of the population, it's sinking, it's decreasing. So they have big problems in their cultural structure, so to speak. And another area which also really points to a major shift here, it's to listen, and to maybe there are also studies of the very youngest persons who has waken up to their sexual sides in them, teens and maybe the young persons in their 20s. When you ask them, especially in our culture maybe, and some cultures in the world, it can differ a little from where we look in the world, but many of these youngsters, they don't want to call themselves a male or female. They don't like the binary system others, we old persons, have grown up with as a natural thing. But here they also, when it comes to the sexuality, they feel themselves, I'm a sexual being. But their sexuality, they won't put it in a category, homosexual, bisexual, or something else. Now the key word, the modern word, is a sexuality of fluidity. Their sexual identity is much broader. They feel it's a range of possibilities today. And here Martinus says, he didn't know about exactly what is happening now, but he could see that these big changes should come, and the dissolving of the families, and and especially what we are looking at is that we are going out of the animal kingdom, and therefore, of course, we have to change our sexual behavior from the animal sexuality into a sexuality for human beings. And that's a jump. That's really a change that we will make over a couple or many lifetimes. In fact, in all the lifetimes we still have in front of us before we get our cosmic consciousness and really leave the animal kingdom and go into the real human kingdom. One sign more, and that is that more and more countries in the world, they are now forced, you can say, from the shift of consciousness in people to make in the official papers not only the two boxes you can mark that you are male or female, they have been forced to have a third gender option that you, and I don't know what they call it, and that's for those people who can't identify themselves with either being a male or a female. They feel something the two sexes. And Martinus tells us that we are, all of us, going to become more and more androgynous. So the mixing of the masculinity in us and the femininity in us, which we all have, and I will come back to that, is on its way. So the big question, a natural question, is what's going on? Why is it in this way? Why can we see all these signs? What's happening in our consciousness? And I will use these three symbols to go a little bit more into it. And I must also say this topic is so broad, so comprehensive. So I will touch on different things, and then if you have questions, put them, and we can go on with them afterwards. But why is the sexual structure that important? And the sexual structure, first I will say, it consists of the two poles. Let me see if I get why. Yeah, but it won't. I'm touching the right, the wrong place. Therefore, I couldn't move. So, if we look here, where is the sexual structure situated? And it's here in the superconsciousness, where all the eternal laws and structures exist, and the sexual structure is there as well, of course, and it's in the spiritual part of us, and it's an eternal part of us. And there we have our two sexual poles, the masculine and the feminine poles. And then you could ask, of course, the natural question is, why didn't he draw them, put them in the symbol? And that's a very good question, and I don't have the proper answer to that. Maybe you could speculate, but I won't do it just now. But he mentioned when he is explaining this symbol, he explains that the pole structure is in the X2, in the ability of creation and experiencing. So here we often put the marker here somewhere, because these two poles, this structure is governing the basic energies, which means is governing our path through the spiral circle. So therefore, this sexual structure is of that importance. And why did I take this symbol? I think many of you maybe have seen it. It's the symbol number 16, the eternal body, as a symbol for karma and our fate. But that's because what we have heard today also, we are living in this communication with the rest of the universe, in fact, with all our micro beings, with macro beings, and we are living in this constant exchange of energy. That's where the life, and in fact, in this exchange of energy, when we meet the outer world, we are creating our path through the spiral circle. And here comes the poles, because it's the masculine pole. When I'm sitting talking here to you, it's through my masculine pole, because the masculine pole is the pole from where all energy emanates, goes out from me, from my leading, governing I decide what to create, what to think, what to do, and so on. All these energies will leave me, so to speak, and therefore I have this symbol. We are all the time, every second, energy is emanating from us, is radiating from us. And this is happening through the masculine pole. And the other thing is, when we experience world, all what we experience, all we sense, all the inner, all what happens to us, our fate when we take it in, what we receive, that we will do always. So when you listen now, and if you look at the screens and so on, then it's through your feminine pole you do this. So therefore, this pole structure is totally basic in the creation of life. And that's the reason why females and males are so different. Not so different anymore as we have been, as we will see here. So I will go on to explain more. as Søren went through this main symbol, Martinus, he comes back again and again and again, because one of his biggest tasks is to teach us that darkness is in fact a part of life, a necessity that we go through the darkness, through the sufferings. But we only do it in this animal kingdom. The other 5 kingdoms will be of light, different forms of light, but in complete light. And why are those 5 kingdoms filled of light, wisdom, and bliss, and all these things? It's because that all beings who are in these levels and realms, they have a balance between their masculinity and femininity, the masculine and feminine poles. So they will have an overload, so to speak, of love. And they will always be loving persons, and with the wisdom as well, because love and wisdom are 2 sides of the same thing. And that's because of the balance of the poles. So how could, I didn't finish my sentence before, that the important thing is to understand this light is to go through darkness as well. We can't know what warmth is if we haven't experienced cold. It will make no sense to talk about what's warm if we don't know what coldness is. And that's the same with the big subject, so to speak, darkness and light. We need to go through the darkness. But how will the darkness be created? And here, again, back to the poles. The creation of darkness is when the double-poled plant is going into nearly, I take the broad lines here, headlines, so to speak, so we don't go into details. But then with this, the plants living in a blissful world, so to speak, their experience will be of light. But then something happens. We will be split into 2 sexes. And this realm, the animal kingdom, is the only realm where there are 2 sexes. In all 5 the other kingdoms, there will be only 1 sex, 1 gender, so to speak. So what happens is the splitting up happens, as we can see at the other symbol over here, which shows the animal kingdom. And when we get up on 2 legs in the middle of the animal kingdom and start to develop humaneness, the energy of feeling, and in fact intelligence also comes into play. That is because that we here has reached from the if we think of the plant kingdom, it will be a little bit beneath there, and there you can see that the feminine pole and the masculine pole, the green one, in this feminine female being, during the evolution through very primitive animal states up to where we get up on 2 legs, then something happens and that is that here we will be as much as Martinus called it, one-poled. We have both poles, but it's only the one dominating pole that are ruling us, so to speak. But what happens here is that the latent pole in the females will start to grow, and that's the masculine pole. And the reason why so much happens now when we are, I think we are somewhere here, It's a broad spectrum from maybe 10, 20 lifetimes when I do like this, or even more, 50, 100, I don't know. And the opposite for the male sex, all the males come up on two legs because the feminine pole in them start to grow. And therefore also start the evolution of consciousness. And over here we have the line of reincarnations, the eye in the middle, and then lifetime after lifetimes, and the numbers, we shouldn't count the numbers. In between, we should not look so much at that because we don't have the time for that. But what he expresses here is the darkness in the animal kingdom. And the light that brings us back, Martinus emphasizes, is the sexual life, in fact. That's the instinctively experienced light in the sexual intercourse. That's, in fact, a little glimpse. He calls the act of culmination, he calls it, in fact, a cosmic glimpse without intellectuality. But where we are now is that we are evolving our intellectuality thanks to the secondary pole, not the primary pole, as we will go on to look at now. And we will do it with this picture of the Sphinx, because here we have, it's in one way you can say the Sphinx is the solving of the riddle of who are we. We have been meditating and thinking and had a lot of philosophies around who are we as human beings. And here Martinus comes with this, we are eternal beings and so on, and living here in the animal kingdom. And we live here just as the Sphinx is describing in its appearance. We still have an animal part, and we also are developing a humane part, symbolized with the head and the body, so to speak. For we are still mammals. We can't come from that, even though we like to call us human beings. But we are not yet real human beings. As in fact, this picture not really describes. But the interesting thing with this symbol, it's number 66, it's called the human being with the perfect thought climate. And the perfect thought climate is shown with all the basic energies in its right places. It's a person with complete health. And then he says, but we are not there yet. So he has another similar symbol where we can see it's a little bit more grumpy, what's called. The energies are not that nicely put. We don't have that nice radiation aura as we see here. But what he puts in this symbol is our poles, the pole structure. It is in the spiritual, at the spiritual level. But there we have all the talent kernels that is reflected in our, and he calls in fact the masculine pole and the feminine pole for our fundamental talent kernels. Maybe another word is used, but they are in a way above all the other talent kernels. And here we can see he has put the primary pole, that means the masculine pole, if this is a man, in the sexual region, and it's not physical, it's a psychic, it's electric structure in the body. But we are light beings, we are electric beings. Those who can see a little bit more than only with our physical eyes, they can sometimes perceive that every living being has this light radiation. And then in the area of the brain, the secondary pole is, and that means here if it's a man, it's a feminine pole, and opposite for females. The primary pole, the feminine, in the sexual region, and the secondary pole, our masculine pole, in the region of our brain. But they are, yes, so we will now see, because both of these poles have their area in our consciousness. You can say both poles are ruling different areas in our consciousness. And the primary pole is ruling all the old things we still keep from the animal kingdom, all the instinctive things. And at first, it's the pole that defines our sex in the animal kingdom. And then it's containing all the instinctive functions: self-preservation, urge for mating, animal sexuality. I mean, nobody taught the animals what to eat and what not to eat and how to mate. That's instinctive in them. And it's still, in a way, in us. And therefore, it's also the pole for falling in love. And the falling in love, the amorous love, the infatuation, what you can call it in English. In Danish and Swedish, we have two words. We have a word for falling in love, and then we have love. That more means the neighborly love. And but Martinus also tells us, and we can see it, it's very obviously, that these two, in fact, totally opposite thought climates. The falling in love, which is, it emanates from our hormone, the system of our hormones. And therefore Martinus puts a quite interesting word on this type of love. He calls it artificial love. When I was young, there was a tall, handsome man and had good, interesting things and so on. And I thought, that could be something interesting. But there were no hormones in me that said anything. So, I mean, to fall in love, it's not I tried intellectually to figure out that could be maybe a good partner, but that's not the way falling in love functions. And therefore, it's carried of these instincts, and therefore it's a sort of artificial love. It's quite another thing when we come to the other side here. So there's a lot of confusion of what is love. And that's also naturally because today we are mixing the things. Falling in love can also start a process where there will come into the relationship a lot of real love, so to speak. We maybe come back to that. And Martinus, in fact, he calls this our primary pole for the pole of darkness. Because here we have all, that's why the kingdom of the animal kingdom is the place for darkness. Because we were split in two sexes, then we are still urging for love and blissful experiences and so on. Where we come from, the five kingdoms, we had plenty, we had abundance in our own consciousness. So we were just giving and serving and all these things where the neighborly love was on top, so to speak. So we were not in lack of anything. We had a surplus, you could say. So we could just spread the love, and therefore the law of karma guarantees us to enjoy love ourselves. It's the opposite here in the kingdom of the animal kingdom, because here the happiness is outside ourselves. We need one of the other half beings. When we are more or less half with our dominating primary pole, to experience happiness, I need one of the others, of the other gender, the other sex. Then we can make this artificial union, and in this artificial union in your sexual act, we will have this glimpse of the wholeness which we have created in an artificial way in the copulation act, you can say. So that's the light that has brought us through the animal kingdom. But also the jealousy, the fighting for the best of the opposite sex, and all the wars today, in fact, Martinus says, is a prolongation, maybe you could say, I don't know if you could use that word there, of this jealousy, of this urge to be the most powerful, have the most things to inspire, and this is the male perspective, ops, to reach out to get the most beautiful woman. And for the women, and here comes the differences, I'll go a little bit more into that in a moment. The women have to be as much attractive as they can. Their power is, as I see it, in their sexuality, in what they can give to this man with in this, and their own longing for the biggest, the strongest, to protect them. So here we have a little glimpse of why it's the darkness. It's also the kingdom, the animal kingdom, where we want to own things for ourselves. And that's the test. Is my falling in love? Is it the neighborly love? Which I think maybe sometimes it is. And then I may often take this example. Oh, after 5 years, I found him, the most beautiful man on earth in my falling in love glasses. And then what I don't do is the next day or the next month go to my best friend, my best girlfriend, and tell her, oh, I found such a nice man. I think you should go and take a holiday trip with him. No, it's my. So here we have, and that's all what we want to own. It comes from the primary pole. Therefore, it's the pole of darkness. And these young persons I talked about before, which and they have come there where they are much more flexible in their minds because they are rather developed this secondary pole. Many of them, they are not so interested in things, in the material goods. They, like, for instance, today, they are on their way out of the domination of the dark, their primary pole. Maybe they use, as I didn't mention on the other, because they have a rather developed secondary pole. There the humanists have also developed. So now maybe they create companies which it's not a question of earning a lot of money. It's a question of doing good things for people, not for the profit, but for doing good things. So there we have really a major shift. In one way you can say we are at the tipping point from being very egoistic, only thinking of ourselves, into becoming much more altruistic because of that the secondary pole now is coming nearer and nearer in our evolution of our consciousness. So that was maybe, yeah. So if we go to the role of the secondary pole, it's the pole that is leading terrestrial man out of the animal kingdom. It's due to this pole that we grow in our consciousness, humaneness, intelligence, and all the things we heard before. And it's containing all the new things, all the things we do that the animals don't do. Intellectuality, we are reading, studying all the things. We are making art and all the creativity and the humaneness, and we are developing very slowly the capacity for being more and more intuitive. And we are in fact on our way to develop a new human sexuality, which we will come back to also. So it's a pole for the neighborly love, and it's a pole of light. But I will comment a little here, because Martinus, it's right that it's the pole of light. This growing secondary pole will always lead to the light. But in the beginning, when we evolve a lot of intelligence, will this pole, before it's really work on its own, we get the capacities of intelligence, for instance, but it's used by the dominating pole. So therefore, mankind at the moment are expressing the most wildly darkness in the world through the capitalistic system, through animal eating and all what is done with the animals. As they are not living beings anymore in the industry today. This is a very sharp intelligence without and with an egoism behind. Now thinking of the animals, the suffering of the animals. And that's in fact because of the intelligence of the pole of light. But this stages we are in this culmination of darkness, they are necessary. We need to do all the faults, all the dark things. If we don't do that, we won't be able to experience the highest light. So that's a little tricky one with the pole of light. But the knowledge will always be light. Light and knowledge is, two sides. And for instance, I read in a mail that I was inspired of the quotation you had, Pernilla, from, was it Khalil Gibran? And a quotation from Martinus is the name of the chapter in the little book. You can read it in English on the homepage. The Road of Life, Livet 2, The Road of Life. And chapter 4 has the headline, and the headline says that darkness is, all darkness is a school for wisdom. So therefore, darkness is veiled knowledge and wisdom. And here we have then this Martinus, he used often nature as metaphors, and this is a very usable metaphor, I find. I use it in many different, because we are this mountain, he calls it the sensory mountain. So it's not a physical mountain, it's a mountain for evolution of our consciousness. But what I want to use it is to, why? It's because I will show the big differences between males and females, between man and woman. And we can look at it more openly today, because now the differences are not that big as they have been, but they are still obvious I find. And all the discussions of gender and research and all, yeah, it's out there. But here, from the view of reincarnation, the whole spiral circle, Martinus tells us that males and females are, in fact, because the male are focused on giving out, creating. All you men, you have created this world. You have built the bridges, you have digged in the ground, you have built the houses, you have shaped this world for us in the outer world. That's the giving out principle that has been the dominating pole for you, the masculine pole. And we as women, we have given birth. We have to all the children, and we died when we gave birth, and the children died, and we have gone through suffering in different ways. You were, all the men, you were, as we see now in Qatar, I just got the association with this football things, and all the immigrant workers, they are dying. It's so many, so it's incredible. But that's a way men has been going through the evolution, and we have done it in different ways. And here Martinus has a very interesting text, I find, where he really describes the contrast between being a female and a male. And he starts with talking about, because we, I must say, if we look at the mountain, in the marriages, we have lived together. Physically, we have lived together. We have shared bed, bread, children, and so on, the daily life. But in our consciousness, consciousnesses maybe, we have lived on each side of this mountain. So all you men have climbed upwards to the top on the one side, the front side, of course, and we have climbed up on the back side of this mountain. And the interest, we wait with that. We'll take the quotation, but he starts with the person who has come up and see the whole horizon. So here is how he expresses it. This new being differs from the male, the double pole being up there with the cosmic consciousness, which is marked with this yellow star. This new being differs from the male or the female being in that it has a double horizon, whereas the male being senses in the main only in a masculine way, and the female being only in a feminine way, causing each of them to live within their own sphere of consciousness or horizon. The complete double pole being on the top senses in both a masculine and a feminine way, and thereby has the possibility of experiencing life in both these great contrasting spheres. I find this quotation very interesting when we go into all the studies of why are we as we are today as females and as males. Because we have, of course, all where Pernilla talked us of the memories, all the experiences are inside us. We carry them with us. We have gone through all the incarnations in different ways as male and as females. And therefore Martinus also talks about a third gender, as I mentioned before. And this is in this section in the Book of Life, volume 3. And it's not on the net yet, but it will come soon. You can go then into chapter or part 942. Life, therefore, also consists of this third gender, and that means it's a double pole gender, where the secondary pole has come into the balance. So we have regained, we have renewed our cosmic consciousness, and we can go forth and live 5 kingdoms in this bliss in different ways, in our home of light, where we really belongs, where we come out of the imprisonment, as Martinus called it, in our physical, in the heavy world here. But we need to have this darkness as an experience. So now I will end this. There are so much. I must also say, you can conclude that females and males have different pathways climbing the sensory mountain. And it's also interesting now when we are that developed of the secondary pole, we start to look at the other side of the mountain, and therefore we as women, some will become astronauts, and males will become midwifers. And now we find it interesting to share our ideas, but that's because of the intellectual and artistic, or what it is, talents we have with us at this point, at the level we are now. So now, at the top of this mountain, we are even more flexible, as with the young persons I talked about before. So I will finish this, I think I go over time here, but we are living in a change of sexuality, and that's also a big topic. But one of the things that from the animal sexuality to the sexuality of human beings, it'll be a very slowly process where our bodies will become more and more sensitive. Now we have our biggest sensations through our sexual organs, and we will have that for a long time in the future. But besides the sexual organs, we are developing more and more other sorts of caressing. And Martinus was very inspired when he, I don't know if it was in the 20s or the 30s, he likes to go to the cinema and look at films. And then he saw that they were kissing, and they went on kissing. It was a long kisses. And then he said, aha, here we have, it's a start. He saw, here is the new type of caressing each other, where it's to give pleasure for the other person. That's the main thing. Of course, you get the pleasure yourself, and one day you will understand that the more pleasure you will give to another being, the more you will experience yourself. And I will finish with a quotation about kissing. And people's growing tendency to kiss, which is, of course, something relatively new in evolution, was not originally part of the one-poled act, and is thus a manifestation of the sexual efforts of the opposite pole in the being, that now, albeit unconsciously in the being itself, begin to make their presence felt. Yes. It is the beginning of a new kind of gender, and all human beings who feel joy and a sense of pleasure from kissing and kiss during the one-poled sexual act have long since ceased being one-pole beings in their purest form. So, and now pandemic has put we are not allowed to kiss as much, maybe, as we maybe did a little, started to with friends and so on, and hug and all these things. But that culture of being together with each other in a new, free way, not demanding, not thinking of my own pleasure, but in giving joy and giving pleasure to others, that's the road we are on, also to the balanced poles and to the real human kingdom. So we have a really wonderful trip in front of us. So I will finish here, and we will have 10 minutes pause, and then if you have questions, come, or reflections, come with them, and we will talk about them, around them, the three of us. Welcome back, and thank you for your attention.
right, welcome back. And I hope you can see us. Yeah. Because I see a pause picture, but I hope that you can see us. Yes, all right. Thank you. Welcome back. And I'm sorry there was a few minutes delay. But here we are, and we have received a couple of questions. And if you would like to ask more questions right now while we're talking, we are happy to read them. So don't hesitate.
And you
Yeah.
can read them in, if you feel more comfortable to read in, write in Danish or Swedish, or then we can translate
Exactly.
them. So you are
To
welcome.
remember to put the sound out here as well. I just thought about a first question. You mentioned a small book, or his small books, Solveig, and he has written all these small books. You can buy them on the internet, you can read them on the net, but you can also buy them if you visit Martinus Centre here in Klint. And one of them is called The Principle of Reincarnation, which of course suits our topic. And I thought that a few lines here actually lines up so beautifully with what you talked about in the beginning, because he talks about being terrified of death. Suddenly somebody just turns into a corpse and then falls apart, and it seems very empty. And we all know that feeling, even if we have this world picture, we know that feeling. But he says that even now, the individual terrestrial human being has the possibility to turn death into something beautiful instead of something horrifying. It can learn to die by learning how to live. That is, by becoming familiar with the laws of life and trying to live in accordance with them. And I thought about these near-death experiences. Isn't that something that they talk about, that they actually learn to live through this experience?
Yes, it's an interesting turning there. He talks about learning to die through learning to live in a more forgiving and loving way. And it's easier to go for the transition to the other side.
Yeah, exactly.
And here the near-death experiences say that when they get rid of their fear of death, they have easier to live.
Exactly.
So even people that have been depressed or maybe have social phobia and so on, they have been more outspoken and more in contact with life after they have had this big relief of this fear of death. So it's interesting.
Yeah,
both ways.
exactly.
Yes.
And I find it very interesting, and you have read more. I haven't. Søren has been totally occupied of this book, so I'm longing to after the Bruce Grayson book. But I've listened to him on YouTube. You can find a lot of interesting. He's a very special person, I feel, and he has given workshops for students, as far as maybe you can explain, who have not had these experiences, the NDOs, NDs.
Yeah, in the end of this book, after he says that even when they study NDEs at the university or at the college, and they have this topic in the subject they study. They also change in a positive direction when it comes to practicing compassion and neighborly love and feel more meaning and purpose in life. So it's kind of what do you say? Smitta, heter det?
Contagious.
Contagious.
Yes, exactly.
This experience that the near-death people experiences have of this realm of love and compassion. And even studying it, and I feel when I read this book by Bruce Grayson, I feel it will have an effect on people. And that's also, he has this, in the end of his book, he says, the title of the book, After, it has 3 reasons. The first one is there an afterlife? And the other one is how people have changed the time after the near-death experience.
It's a double meaning.
Yes. And the third.
You have forgot it.
You have to read the book.
That was a cliffhanger, so
Don't know him, so just.
No, that was
But I think that it's also
it was after reading about it.
Yeah.
It was also after he hoped that reading his book would also have the same
Yeah.
inspiration.
So his book in itself.
And that's also, as you say, it's interesting to see this humane scientist.
Yeah.
This he is still saying, I don't know for sure if there's a life after death. Maybe
It's a
within
science.
10 years or 50 years, we'll find another way of explaining this. But it's the most
Probable
solution that there
Yeah.
is a consciousness that can survive death.
Exactly.
So he's still very much a scientist, but he's striving in this, his science, in his studies, is to understand this realm in a way,
New
and the effect of
phenomena.
it.
And of course, there are so many questions you could put to what's happening
Yep.
after. And I mean, he's a little bit into the studies of children who remember their earlier
How
Mentions
lifetimes.
it, yeah.
Yes. So therefore, what happens in between the lives? For instance, that's just one question, but
Yes.
there are hundreds of questions you can put. So,
Yes.
and
I just want to mention another thing that I think is very interesting. It is that he has, as he worked as a psychiatrist, he also often met people with suicide attempts.
yes.
And then some of them had these near-death experiences. And those who had near-death experiences, they did not make any more suicide attempts. They had these terrible situations psychologically before they try, and they maybe come into this same terrible situation, but the contact with this realm made them feel a purpose also with the suffering. So you could say, well, if it's so wonderful over there, why don't they just go over again? No, it was the opposite effect. I think that's very interesting. It gives a deeper feeling of meaning also being here on this planet with the struggles and suffering.
And I think that also raises the question that you talked about, what happens after death. Martinus has written about it, and perhaps we haven't got the time to go extensively into it, but it struck me that we are perhaps more afraid of just being extinguished. It's sort of the instinct. Human beings have, for long periods of time, been afraid of what happens after
Hell.
death. Exactly. This is an English seminar, so if you speak about Hamlet, when he has his famous monologue, to be or not to be, it's rather more that he speculates, to commit suicide, to put it bluntly, but he said, well, it would be a chance to sleep, but then I could also dream. So, I mean, to commit suicide would be a sin. They knew that. So, I mean, what are the options? Not good. I mean, so people have been afraid of that, very much so. And that, of course, and people might still be afraid of that.
Yes.
There was a question we saw in connection to another film on our YouTube channel where somebody said, well, I'm not, we have all these nice people, mild-mannered academics, I think, talking about the NDUs, and they seem so happy. But I'm not really good. I'm not really bad. What will happen to me? What will I experience?
Yes.
And that's a part of what Sören said with the ABC,
Yeah.
because we still have instinctive things. I guess many of us, I have a feeling, I mean, I think I've been in very materialistic a lifetime, at least one lifetime, but also that I earlier have been in Christian traditions. And I think most of us have still, on an instinct level, these fears of hell, even though we don't believe in them with our day consciousness today. But it's a sea consciousness still in our minds, which are arisen, or what do you call it? It's put into action also now with the fear with the pandemic, because the regression you talked about, it's in fact a regression to our primary pole. It's a self-preservation that comes into the game.
Exactly. But you can read about it in his works, of course, different structures. If you have a certain structure, you would experience that in the afterlife and so on. I think we could perhaps have a different seminar on that at another point, but you can read it.
You could, we all think, have this experience that we have some dark aspects of our consciousness.
Yeah.
Sometimes we wake up in the night with a terrible nightmare. And these types of experiences, also when we have dark night of the soul or depression or anxiety, that also might be projected in this state where you don't have control.
Exactly.
And it's very interesting with these NDEs where he says, Bruce Grayson, that some people have bad experiences. It's not many, but some people have that. And he says the conclusion he has when they've been listening to many of them, it is that they can't let go of control, because you lose control when you die, and you come into this in the tunnel and so on, and your life review and so on. And he says when people kind of give up, it becomes pleasant.
Yeah.
Then the light comes in. And maybe we should just say something about this transition area before going into the light. But because the question you referred to from another film here on YouTube, that there is kind of a transition area after we die, Martinus tells us, where we might meet these shadows in our consciousness. And we have to leave the terrestrial area, so to say. And this, in religions, we talk about purgatory, the purgatory. And he says, yes, he doesn't like that word, but
He uses it.
he uses it. He says
Not a
that
good
you
word.
can come into this situation where you meet your more selfish sides, or often he's connecting it with having bad conscience.
Exactly.
If you have bad conscience, and it's very interesting to see some people when they are getting real old and they start to prepare for dying unconsciously, they often want to get rid of the bad conscience. Maybe they ask people to come to the deathbed so they could say something that is a big relief for them to be able to say it and ask for forgiveness. And that is in fact the purgatory, that you meet this unfinished business, as Elizabeth Kubler-Ross would say, to get rid of these ties, these bounds that clinch to you. And as soon as you pray, says Martinus, ask for help, these thought climbers will be released, and you come into the light.
Yeah.
And everybody. So that person who asked for it, he doesn't need to be afraid.
No,
It goes for everyone.
everybody's going into the light.
Yes.
It's just a question of this transition area.
And the light beings will, in fact, wait until you lift. They are waiting for you
Yes.
to come out of the darkness and ask for help.
Yes.
The help is there already,
Yes.
but they are not really allowed, or how to express it, to do it for them.
Before you ask.
They and then the process of Martinus tells us that our darker sides, they have to be
Left behind.
left behind. I don't know. We sometimes use a slang talking about our galoshes. What's
Our
called?
shoes, you could
Our
say.
our shoes
Oh, yeah.
should be put outside. In the Bible, there's a they call it. You have to put on your marriage
Outfit.
Robe.
outfit, robe.
Exactly.
Yes,
Yeah.
and that's because you wouldn't have this pause and this regeneration and this holiday if you went over there with your more shadowy sides. So therefore, you have to put your shoes outside, and when you then incarnate, the shoes will come on again.
Yeah.
And
That's what we call childhood.
that's what, and the rest of the life.
Rest-
We have
You
some
see the
challenges.
baby.
Yes.
Exactly.
The-
Okay. Questions,
yes.
Okay.
friends. We have questions. We have at least 2 questions related to your topic, Søren, or our common topic of reincarnation, and then to your topic, Solveig. So we'll start with an anonymous question. that has been sent to us by email, and I just read it. And as we said, you can also ask questions in Danish or Swedish. But this question is as follows. I had an experience twice as a teenager visiting an enclosed convent that I knew the whole building, all the gardens and the daily life there, even though I only physically saw the face of one nun through a very small window. Can experiences of déjà vu like this be an indication that one has experienced people, places, and situations in previous lives?
Yes, I think so. And that in
That's
some
a scientific answer.
in sometimes it could be when you have these old places that has been there in past lifetimes, and do you remember we had one person that in our course center up in Sweden told us that she had been driving from Denmark, I think, up to Sweden, and they came to a certain church, an old church, and she went in and she could show all the places in the room, down the cellar, and show everything. She didn't know why, but she just knew the place. And that is, I think, a remembrance from past life. And then I think some people can also have that when they meet people. They just know that they know this person, but they haven't seen them. But I think also when you use the déjà vu concept, it could also be that you have some precognition of something. For instance, Martinus says that when we are sleeping, we can in fact get some information of what's going to happen
in the future.
And then when you come to that situation, you just recognize it. So it can also be a kind of a precognition, and that you have got some information between the incarnations, for instance, or when you sleep. So Martinus tells also that an archaeologist, for instance, can, on the spiritual plane between the lifetimes, if he's she's very inspired of this archaeology, will come to that historical place in this archive in the universe and can see how this
should be solved.
Yes, and how it looks.
And how it looks like.
And what it looked like, this place. And then when they incarnate and they go to school again and learn about this, they can solve this mystery. I think that was one of the things with Champollion, who solved the
Egypt.
The hieroglyphs. Hieroglyphs, I think it's called. That is probably he had this knowledge within and could solve it. He started to learn all these languages you needed, and he was 19 years old when he was in the university professor. So he was really dedicated totally to his task. So yes, I think this time and space is not really as we think it is.
No.
And of course, he mentioned that in the afterlife, or the period between our lives, if you're really, really interested in something, I know an archaeologist, for example, you could just go back in time and see what it was like, things that you have really studied. So, of course, that could enhance it. And if we have our past lives with us somehow stored in memory, even if we can't remember it, I mean, we carry them somehow with us. So that could be activated. Perhaps if it's a very important building that you have been, you could imagine a convent. You have spent perhaps many, many years in the same building. So it could be just a memory. Yes, we have more questions. It's a very interesting topic. Another question from Michael Weber Madsen here in Denmark, but he writes in English. Do you think that there will be a breakthrough in the way conventional science views reincarnation in the foreseeable future? So what do you prophets say?
Of course, we are. I don't know if I should start, but we are, when we have this knowledge from Martinus, and of course we are looking, when we go to the internet, for those who are thinking a little bit in the same direction, but it feels as if there is really more and more. What did they say, Eben Alexander and Bruce Grayson, that something happened in When was it?
2012.
2012.
It was the same year when Anita Mojani and Alexander
Ibn
Ibn Alexander published their book. So maybe Martinus talks about impulses.
Yes.
And maybe there was an impulse where near-death experiences was really a topic, and it has exploded.
Yeah.
The interest. So I mean, you have your partial way of looking at things.
That's the
But
thing.
when I read this book by Bruce Grayson, I can't understand how anybody could read it without changing their worldview.
Yeah.
It's so convincing.
But we are
that's
a little bit naive, maybe.
that's because I have the worldview that it's
Yes.
fit
Yeah,
for. But
and as read, if you have, depending on that balance between intellect, spiritual needs, and so on, I mean, but just lie outside our
But there are
perception.
more and more groups of the scientists.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yes.
all the researching now. I mean, I'm not into that. I don't really understand the details and so on. But as far as I can feel, or what do you say, have an inkling that they are starting to reveal that there is an interplay between the big things out there in the universe, that there are some sort of plasma, and so the structures, there's much more connection and so on. Things are going on. And I also find it very inspirational that all the fathers of the quantum physics, they had a spiritual experience in one way, and they talked about consciousness as a dimension of the universe. Some of them very directly, but then, but they, of course, they were in the front line. If you look at this. With the impulses you talk about, they were sent because they had the qualities to bring this forth, but they had more qualities maybe on the humane level to also accept the spiritual side than those who came after them. But they should come and introduce it. That's one way to see it. But I will mention the group we have seen. There are some conferences. If you saw also the Galileo Commission,
Summit conference,
the Galileo Commission, where a lot of scientists who are talking of a post-materialistic era. But when it'll be mainstream, I think it takes a while still. But
and I think also it's like this is saying, it's from the Bible, that the first will be the last. That many people that maybe are into their viewpoint, they can stiffen in that viewpoint. And I don't know the name of it. One of the scientists around this psychic area, he also says that you should be skeptical,
yes,
but you can also suffer from skepticism. And then it doesn't matter how many proofs you put on the table, you will always refuse it because it doesn't fit with your established view. So if you're very into it, and I think many universities, they are really stiffening in this materialistic worldview. So many of these scientists in the boundaries, they are not welcome. So maybe it will be people in general opening up for reincarnation
from the
and
grassroots.
studying these near-death experiences on the net and reading the books. And I think it will come from the outside into the universities and not the other way.
And the young persons, I think that
Yes.
it comes, they are more open-minded.
They've been playing their games with new lives all the time. So
in
they
computer
know.
games, exactly. And they might be more open-minded generally. But I suppose people who are really trained as scientists, and if they are not that set on making a career and so on. I heard a German doctor in that German TV channel. He just said, well, there are so many things that you can't explain. About 100 cases where people have described their own operations with details that just can't be explained. He didn't really give the cause, but he said that's what it's like. You can't explain it. And it's been proved and proved again. And so on. Yes.
It's interesting times.
a very
I think it's
interesting time.
also interesting. Shouldn't we say that we have a very happy day next Saturday where Mikael, who just put this question, will come to us?
Okay.
Because the center will
we'll
open
open again.
again with physical courses
Visits,
here. Our 3-year course we will meet with the people.
Yeah.
So that was
'Cause
just,
we-
but we are so happy about
are,
after
and,
this year of lockdown. So welcome, Mikael, to join
Welcome
us.
to the center, and
Yes.
welcome to courses at the end of
Yes,
May as well.
so-
You can just read more on our homepage. But we'll continue to live stream, though, for those of you who can't come. But we certainly want to meet physically as well. A question for you, Solveig, or for everyone, but you as a specialist here, from Anne Wedeger. Are gender swaps and bisexuals and trans people reaching the top of the sense mountain?
I think you can. I will say there's so much Martinus haven't
Yeah.
described in his analysis. He gave us the headlines, the structure, and so on. But I think that these phenomenon you are describing, trans
transsexual,
people, and they can happen in different levels in the development of the poles. And I feel it's a very difficult topic to really go too deep into, because it's rather much speculations. But there can, of course, happen. He tells us in the symbol that the suffering in changing our sexuality and the whole thing from the animal kingdom to the human kingdom, it's the last thing we can leave behind us. So on this symbol I had 33.
You want to show it?
Yeah, you can. In fact, it's there.
Okay.
You can let me see if I can put my yes. This thought climate is the birth pangs, fødselsvejr, for the change of poles. And look at this. I mean, our negative thinking, our arrogance, our
Yes.
and so on. They will. We will grow over them, so to see. No, that's now the words are.
They will.
But still, we will have troubles in this coming out of the animal sexuality and turn into.
Complications.
There will be complications. There will be pains. There will be birth pangs. And if we look at the homosexuality, the way the homosexual people have been treated during lifetimes, it was a very important part for Martinus, I feel, that he explained that the homosexuality is a natural stage also. So, but it has been very painful. That's an area that has been very painful. And
history,
also this
yes.
dysphoria is, I think, the word when you feel this, am I in the right body, and so on. But he hasn't really written anything really. Maybe he has said something we can make some speculations over, but I think it's a hard question to come
To also, in this ending of it, it's hard. You have to go much deeper if you should.
Yeah,
It just
yeah.
It's a
continue, but of course
topic
you
in
could
itself.
read more and I just thought about it. I mean, we celebrate 100th anniversary of his world picture this year, as you have probably seen, and to just imagine how difficult it must have been to write about this in a way that was sort of honest and sensible and useful for us, but it was forbidden at the time, practically, to be homosexual, and it's difficult for us to imagine.
yes.
Yes.
So of course, I mean,
But and
it's
if you want,
understandable that it was difficult.
just about homosexuality, I find that very nice place to read is, and it's in English. You can read it on the net. The Eternal World Picture 3,
Yeah.
and it is the symbol, the text before the explanation of the
33,
symbol.
yes.
It's a 46 or 7.
Pages.
Do you compare? No, not pages, chapters,
Chapters, yes.
or what do you call it?
Just called
sections.
exactly,
Chapters.
Section.
Before the
Yeah.
the explanation of the symbol, and there I find it's a very beautiful explanation of the development of the poles and so on. So,
And is the
and
book
there are many.
Two Kinds of Love? Two Types of Love? Is it translated?
I think so, but we'll have to check.
The little book,
You can buy it on the bookshop.
and read
You
it.
can buy
I think,
it, and you can probably find it.
if we go into the.
I'm used to sitting in Stockholm and doing this on the net, so I don't have the time to write it down right now.
No. It's
But we'll
nice
find
you are
it
here,
out,
Pernilla.
yeah.
It's so nice you're here.
We have perhaps time for 1 or 2 more questions, I think. Thanks for conducting this event. One person writes here, thank you for listening. Did Martinus refer to or explain what enlightenment is? Also, perhaps difficult to summarize, but we do celebrate this 100 years of his world picture. So.
Well,
Enlightenment.
I think the word enlightenment means so many different things.
Yeah,
for
Yeah.
different
in the
people.
world,
Yeah.
used in different ways.
So Martinus has the word cosmic consciousness for
Exactly.
the consciousness that he is expressing all his knowledge from. And that is a very rare situation, to have a day conscious will to just focus and get the answers from this realm, this eternal aspect of life. And I think when many people talk about enlightenment, I think more it is
Cosmic glimpses.
it could be cosmic glimpses, or it could be, even in some areas, I think, psychic experiences and capacity, abilities. So I think it is a little bit tricky with how many definitions it is. But the enlightenment in the deeper sense that Martinus talks about, it is opening of the eternal aspects of life and have a day conscious, will controlled contact with eternity.
Yes.
And knowing this, not only a glimpse, but you can get the answer of all questions. And that is very very rare state of consciousness.
And for that, you need to get the balance between your
Yes.
poles. That's
Yes.
one of the
Definitions, you could say.
definitions that you come back to the balance, and there's the ability for using your, as you said, your intuition will come in that enlightenment.
So in that
process
state,
enlightenment.
you are mentally not a man or a woman.
No,
You are a
even
real
though your
human
body
being.
looks like
Yes.
one of the things, but we will become more and more one.
And we can't force it. As you
No.
said,
No,
it's organic,
we can-
but we can study.
We can
Or-
study and we can train our
We can
compassion.
practice.
We can practice our. The more we are longing to be for help and do good things and so on, the more we will practice. And I think there are so many persons out there also talking about enlightenment, of course, but I really feel there's such a good energy, many places you can find and so on out there. Many people are really longing for a better world and knows about forgiveness and all. And so there's really so much light in this dark period we are going through.
Yes.
So many groups working for the light. So
Important to remember.
yeah, it's so important here in
Very
dark times.
like the ending of your presentation, sir. It's a very sort of positive worldview.
Yes.
And-
Yes.
We have great adventures before us.
Yes.
I think it's time to wrap it up.
Yes.
I think so. You have been
Yes. We
listening
are
for a
over
long
time.
time.
Yes.
Thanks a lot to you, and thanks Jonas for
Yes.
handling all the technology. That's great.
You
We
succeeded.
hope to see you again. We have a course in English in June. You can read about it on our homepage. And then we have, hopefully, the international summer weeks, as we usually have. But then already next weekend, we have a lecture and an introduction course in Danish for all our Scandinavian friends. So
And the introduction course, will that be online also?
it will be also
That
online.
will be online, yes.
So lots of activities here next week.
Yes,
Yeah.
wonderful.
So, but thank you so much.
Thank you.
And
you.
To all
goodbye.
of you. Have a nice weekend.
Have a nice weekend.
Bye-bye.